specifically as it relates to this question of police. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And as you know, as I said, Shakura will not be here today, so I'll just do the quick introductions. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and the APRP is a revolutionary independent mass political party based in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa, one unified socialist Africa. And we just are convinced that that objective of Pan-Africanism is the antidote to the problems that 2 billion African people face, scattered and suffering all over the planet Earth. So that's what we're fighting for, to alleviate that suffering. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism, we do have a strategy. It's laid out in great detail by Kwame Nkrumah in his classic book, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, that you see on the opposite page. We did a full program last week on the handbook, so you should go to our YouTube page if you didn't see it, AAPRPCA. You just go to YouTube, pull up YouTube, in the search field at the top, type in AAPRPCA, AAPRP California. And when you do that, all of these programs are on there, and you can look at last week and participate in how we broke down the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And so usually this program is hosted by myself and Shakura, Ajamu and Shakura, father-daughter AAPRP organizers. Today I'm doing it solo, but as I mentioned, she will be back next week. We believe in self-care, but we believe in revolutionary self-care. There's no such thing as individual self-care. Like people say, well, I just need to step back from the work. And then the minute it gets difficult, that's what people do. The minute the work gets difficult, I need to step back and take care of myself. We're never going to be free like that. So it's not possible to take care of yourself in a capitalist system on an individual level. Who do you know that has gotten healthy on an individual basis in the capitalist system? That's a fantasy and a misnomer. The only self-care is collective revolutionary socialist self-care. So, in the party, we do our best under circumstances to practice that. And, today is one of those days where I just told Shakur, take today and, heal, recover, and we'll be back at it next week. We are doing this consistently, so that's fine. And there may come a time when she needs to do the same for me. So we're glad you all are here, and we're going to go ahead and get started with the topic for today. But first, we just wanted to talk briefly about the history of North American police entities. And when we say North American, of course, we're talking about the United States of America and Canada specifically, those two countries. What is the history of policing in these two regions of the world? And if we start with Canada, the primary police agency that they have that exists up there is called the Northwest Mounted Police, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police. You probably heard that, the latter term, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And this formation was created in 1873, and they started with 300 of them. And these folks were recruited and trained, and their specific role in 1873 was to physically and violently remove First Nations people, Indigenous people, from lands that the Canadian Pacific Railway saw a need to confiscate to build their railroad, because they had speculated and they're like, this is where we want to build the railroad in Canada, the National Railroad, but we got these Indians in the way, these Indigenous people. So the mounted police were formed, specific task of violently removing these Indigenous people. And of course, they effectively accomplished that because they're terrorists. That's what terrorists do. And today, the Canadian Mounted Police serve as the primary policing agency all throughout the entire country of Canada. And here in the backward US, the first police departments emerged in the mid 1800s also, just like in Canada. The initial recruits for police agencies in this country were recruited and participants that were hired by the plantation industry in the southern US. Because today, Juneteenth is the commemoration of the ending of chattel slavery of African people in the United States, right? And when that happened in 1865, Africans, of course, at 1865, we had full control of our faculties, and we had a logical approach to interacting in the world. We don't have that in 2022. So in 2022, the Africans on a plantation will fight. They'll fight you. They'll kill you to stay on the plantation. They'll murder you so they can continue to exist with the master. That's how insane we are today. But back in 1865, we still had a very strong sense of who we were. We knew that we were not Americans. Nobody was calling themselves Americans then. Nobody was calling themselves African Americans, Afro Americans, Black Americans, none of that nonsense. People understood that we were a subjugated people. And so the minute that they got the news that slavery was over and they no longer were forced by force of violence to stay on the plantations, a lot of our people wanted to leave. Now, of course, there's always going to be sellouts. There were sellouts then, there's sellouts now. That's understanding class struggle to understand that phenomenon. But my point is that most of us wanted to leave the plantation. And when this happened in mass, the plantation industry panicked because they didn't see, just like today, all these Europeans and even some of our people were confused in saying this too. Well, the immigrants are taking our jobs. But we all know the jobs that immigrant labor does in this country, nobody born here is willing to do. Do people think they're too good to do that work? So they're not going to do that. But that's the talking point people use. They're taking our jobs. Well, back in 1865, European people in the southern US were not going to start sharecropping. They saw that as menial work that we were supposed to do. So there was not going to be any large onset of Europeans taking over where our forcibly enslaved ancestors left off when the Emancipation Proclamation ended chattel slavery. So the plantation industries felt like they had to act by hiring these people to form these posses, because that's where the term posse comes from, and to ride out and find these Africans who were in these wagon trains, who were in these groupings of people that were moving from the southern US up to the northern US or out here to the western part of this country. Excuse me, I'm allergic and sick from capitalism. But that's what they want. They were hired to terrorize us into turning back from trying to find a better life and going back to the plantation to continue to sharecrop and be brutally exploited through that system. And as I've mentioned several times, the movie Buck and the Preacher, if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's a classic movie made in 1972. Sidney Poitier, you see the picture on the top, Ruby Dee, and Harry Belafonte. And the entire movie is about what I just described to you, how these Africans struggled to get away from the South, and these people terrorized them to turn them back to the South. And the only way that we were able to escape oftentimes, because at that time, the plains, what they call, we just drove through Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas. I could say a lot about that, but they call that the heartland, right? The states that Shakur and I just drove through a couple of days ago. But back in that day, in the 1800s, they were the plains, and they were dominated by indigenous people, as they should have been. And so the only way we could get through those areas and get away from those racist posses was by forming relationships with indigenous plains, indigenous people, and setting up a range. I mean, they were fighting their own war against the Europeans, but there are so many documented cases where we were able to develop understandings with them so that we could travel across the land. And the movie Buck and the Preacher illustrates that. In fact, that movie, I can't even watch the movie without getting emotional. But at the end of the movie, when the the racist posses are trying to get these Africans here, Sidney Poitier and Harriet Belafonte and Ruby Dee, it's the indigenous people that saved them. If it was not for the indigenous people, they would have been killed. And that's what happened oftentimes during those times. So don't bring this nonsense to us because we know our history. Well, nobody ever did anything. Nobody ever came to our aid. Fool, the only reason why you're still here is because of indigenous people. That's the only reason why you're here. There's two reasons: indigenous people and your African ancestors, both of who most of us here reject and don't give the credit and respect that they rightfully deserve. But the point is that as time moved on, these folks who were hired into these racist posses began to develop as these southern areas transition after the Civil War. They became municipalities, and these racist crackers were hired to be the initial police departments. They were recruited and hired to be the initial police departments in the southern US. And this trend continued until the 1990s. You know, police departments like the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, actively recruited people from the southern US. They had, like, in the 1980s, some 25% of the police officers in the LAPD had southern US roots. So the point is that police, whether you're talking about Canada or the US, have always been nothing more than terrorist militias designed to terrorize African and indigenous people. And that's the reason why today is Juneteenth and there are commemorations happening everywhere. I was in Memphis, Tennessee yesterday and saw a huge commemoration. And the first thing I saw was the big police tent. So that's just a question for you who are hearing this. Like, how do you have police whose origins originate from brutally terrorizing our people? And Juneteenth is the historical example of that. But yet now, today in Juneteenth, we're so insane that we have the police there recruiting our people to join the police force. I mean, that shows you somewhere, some people are looking at us and they're just having never-ending belly laughs at how insane our behavior is. I mean, there should be no way that police are a part of anything that we're doing, but certainly Juneteenth, I mean, that's a tragic contradiction. And, just briefly, the Second Amendment, because this is a hot topic in this backward country. And you have to, if you talk about the Second Amendment, you have to relate the Second Amendment to this question of the enslavement of our ancestors. Because if you read the Second Amendment, everybody's got an opinion on it, but less than 1% have actually read it. I mean, the Constitution, as Kwame Ture said, it's trash document. It's toilet paper. We're not here. If you know us, we're not advocating that the Constitution has any integrity, because it doesn't. The people that wrote it had no integrity. The people that started the country had no integrity. So how could the document have any integrity? But the point is that if you're going to use that document as some sort of foundation for whatever this backward empire is supposed to represent, then when you look at the original Second Amendment, you find, and do the research on it, you find that the original version of it was written by James Madison. And he talked about the need to ensure that militias were armed on a national level. That's the language he used in the original version. And they nixed that and replaced the word national with states. So, the Constitution is a national document, right? It's supposed to apply to the whole country. So why would you have the word states in the Second Amendment? The reason why is because the people who were promoting the Second Amendment at that time and in the future, and the amendments that came to it, they wanted to ensure that these racist posses could remain armed in the southern states. And so that's why the whole phrase states' rights, for African people that know our history, like, that's code language for legislation that's against us and indigenous people. You hear it today. They talk all the time about, well, states should have the right to decide that. That's code language for them saying that they want to make decisions and not be pressured by pressure we put on the federal government to place pressure on them. That's what that's all about. And it's the history of this, the backward history of this country. So, tell that part about the Second Amendment to your redneck neighbor who's saying that the whole point of the Second Amendment is to fight tyranny. I mean, these people, they wouldn't know tyranny if it walked right up to them and slapped them in the face. They wouldn't know what tyranny is. I told a man the other day, he's like, well, I'm all about fighting tyranny. I'm like, you would know what tyranny was if it sat on your head and defecated on top of you. I mean, you wouldn't know anything about it. I mean, who the hell are you? You sitting here telling African revolutionaries about tyranny. We've been dealing with tyranny for 500 years. Indigenous people have been dealing with it for 500 years. And here you just figured out how to read the word 2 days ago, and now you want to tell us about it. Sit down before you get hurt. So, let's talk about white supremacy and the police. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute from the context of what we just laid out. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, that's a racist entity to its core. It always has been, it always will be. But they do provide data. And the thing about research is that the whole objective you're trying to achieve is you want to take information from source A, information from source B, information from source C, information from source D, etc. And you want to study all of it. You want to take out the variables in each of those, and then you want to contrast and compare them. And that's how you can begin to develop an analysis. Because when you do that, when you take that approach, what will happen is you will begin to be able to see the contradictions in what people are saying. And that's what research looks like. See, we don't know what we think research is Googling an article. We don't even know who wrote the article. We don't even know their background, their interest, nothing. We think that's no, that's not research. That's brainwashing, brain dirty. That's what that is. Research is what I just described, where you have a process where you can develop an analytical analysis. So the FBI does issue a report. And the reason why I know that is because I use that to make an analysis. And so the report they issued in 2018, they talked about police departments all over the US are heavily infiltrated by active white supremacists. Now, if you needed the FBI to tell you that, then you should probably take some ibuprofen and lie down somewhere. But this entire country has been built on, I could have told you, and I'm sure a lot of you already knew, that police, we have a chant that we say in the AAPRP, and it's FBI, CIA, and police ain't nothing but the KKK. And that's always been the case. The Ku Klux Klan has always been primarily police officers. If you look at the pictures you see on the screen there, they're pictures of the two core workers, Congress of Racial Equality, and the SNCC worker, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The African, James Chaney, was the SNCC member. Michael Swarner and Andrew Goodman, the Europeans, were core members. They were murdered in Mississippi in 1964 by the Ku Klux Klan. But the picture at the bottom, the redneck at the bottom, was the sheriff from Philadelphia, Mississippi. And he was the one who facilitated the capturing of these three activists and their subsequent murder. So he was the sheriff in Philadelphia, Mississippi, but he was also a high-ranking official in the Ku Klux Klan. And this is not a aberration. This is always what it is. They're always police. The neo-Nazis, the Klan, all these people are always police. They're the same thing. Today, in order for you to be a member of the Oath Keepers militia or the Three Percenters militia, white supremacist militias, you have to either be active or former police or active or former U.S. military. So, this is not even debatable what we're talking about right now. And no, we didn't put the name of the cracker on the screen, because if you want to know his name, you should look it up. But we don't even see him as a human being. We see him as someone who should have been taken out of their misery years ago. But we just put the picture up here to illustrate that police and white supremacists is the same thing. So if your only plan of action, if you're being threatened by some neo-Nazis, is to call the police, all I can do is feel sorry for you, because you call the police because the neo-Nazis are attacking your house, and the police sit there and laugh, have a belly laugh at you and unhook the phone so you can't get any more calls through or whatever they do. And meanwhile, they're their colleagues, their comrades are the ones that are breaking in your house and terrorizing you, because that's been the nature of this system for 500 plus years. And a clear example is, as we mentioned, several on the ground white supremacists operating as police officers. They carry out racist violence, and the white supremacist system protects them, right? They kill us in cold blood. I did a workshop several years ago, and I had a European man. This man, he said, well, how do you know Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri? How do you know he wasn't guilty? And I said, I'm going to tell you how I know. I said, because I said there was about 100 people in the room. And I said, you can lie to all these people, but you can't lie to me. I know, and you know that I know that if your son was killed by the police for walking down the middle of the street, you would never come to say, well, he didn't comply with them. If your son was killed for selling cigarettes or a $20 counterfeit bill, supposedly, or firing back at police when they break in your house on a no-knock warrant, or any of these ridiculous reasons why they shoot us down in cold blood, these Europeans would never accept that from the police. They would not stop until a Supreme Court decision was made to honor their slain relatives. In fact, if you want to see the model of lack of cooperation with the police, watch Europeans when they get pulled over by the police. That's the model of non-cooperation with the police. I mean, get out of here with that foolishness. All we're trying to do is maintain our dignity and stay alive. But that entitlement of being a European, they don't ever feel like anybody has a right to stop them and tell them what to do. They don't cooperate. Where you see them cooperating with the police? It doesn't happen. So, the tension of this relationship between the police and, supposedly them being an entity that's here to protect and serve us. But as we talked about with the history of Juneteenth, they've never been that, and they never will be that. I don't know, some of us are so naive that we think that, well, if my brother or my sister or my cousin or whoever joins this organization, that'll change the culture. How has that worked out? It hasn't worked out at all. There's no evidence you could show that since these color-faced people have joined these police departments, that they're shooting us any less, that they're brutalizing us any less. There's no evidence of that. It's not true. It's a fantasy in your head, or whoever that believes that. It's a fantasy in their head. So this has always been a tension, and it always will be a tension. I have the picture here. We went to Philadelphia, Mississippi back in 2014, the two of us, and it was still tense 50 years after the 3 civil rights workers were murdered. I mean, we went to, they have the big plant. It's a small town of 6,000 people. And the thing that's interesting about Philadelphia is that Mississippi is the only state in the US where African people are the dominant population. There's no other state here where that exists. And Mississippi, we're not dominant, but we're 50% of the population in Mississippi. Of course, Mississippi is the poorest state in the US. Its economy rivals that of a so-called technologically underdeveloped country, but that's a different topic. So the point I'm making is that they had this town of Philadelphia, Mississippi. When Shakur and I went there were no Africans there. We didn't see any African. We were on Main Street in that picture. We're right downtown. We didn't see any. You see how we're dressed. I had on a Black Panther Party shirt and my African hat, and we were walking around downtown, taking pictures, everything. The white folks were so intrigued, they were stopping in their cars to take pictures of us because they weren't used to seeing any Africans there, I guess. But we were trying to document. We went to, the one woman had, their plantation houses there. The one woman had the big plantation house. So we got out, we went on her lawn. There was a tree there. We took pictures on the tree, and she comes out the house. May I help you? And we said, yeah, we're doing research. We're just trying to see if you owe us money. Oh, you money for what? And we said, well, this might be our, I mean, it's not ours. We'd have to give it to the indigenous people, but one thing we do know, it's not yours. Get out of here before we call the police. So there again is the point that we're making with this presentation. when they say that, they do that because they know that the role of the police is to uphold white supremacy. They know that. I think everybody knows that except us. We're the only ones that seem confused about that. We think that, well, no, they said that they came to the community meeting and they said they was gonna do this and do that. I mean, that's, you know, if you're that naive, then they should pull you over at night and they should do whatever they want to do to you because you just refuse to face reality. Like, clearly, the facts indicate who these people are and what interests they represent. So, you know, despite the 50 years of that experience and being in that town of 6,000 people, it's still tense. And the reason why it's tense is because they know that they brutalized us and ran us out of that town. They know that. And when they see us there, they got to wonder, well, is this coming back at us? You know, when I was in college, I played these intramural basketball leagues. And there was a European on the team. And we were sitting around one night late after a practice. And he said, you know what? The reason why white people act the way we do is because we're afraid that if you all ever come to power, you'll treat us the way we treat you. And that's the most honest thing I've ever heard come out of somebody white's mouth in my 60 years on this earth, because that's exactly what it is. And, you know, we're not the kind of people that, our culture is not one where that's what we want to do. I mean, I know people mouth off and say stuff, but there's no history of us engaging in violence on a systemic level against anybody. There's no history of indigenous people doing that or Asian people doing that. There's only European people doing that. And I'm not making an argument that they're European people are evil. We're not saying that. We're just saying social conditions, how people have developed, the harsh conditions in Europe have created this reality. The economic contradictions of capitalism, it's a reality that we have to deal with now today. And that tension is thick. And we would argue it doesn't just, when we say tension, it doesn't just apply to places like Philadelphia, Mississippi. We would argue that wherever you are right now, the tension is thick. If you're in Africa, the tension is thick because of these contradictions we're talking about. If you're in this backward country, the tensions are thick because you're stepping on the indigenous people's land. I don't care what anybody says. I drove out to the Wallalas in Oregon, in Eastern Oregon. It's a beautiful mountain range. It was snowing. I drove out there in the snow. It's one of those places where if you yell, it'll echo for several moments because it's just there's canyons there and there's no people. I looked down into that canyon, and I don't care what you all think. You could think I'm insane. You probably think that already. And I don't care whether you think it or not. But I saw indigenous people in that canyon. This was 2012. I saw them there. I know I saw them. I don't care what you say. I know I saw them. I'm not saying they were physically there in 2012, but I saw a vision of them there because that is their land, just like this is their land. And what I took from that is that they are not done. They are still fighting back. That's what I took from that. And I quietly got in my car and left because to me, I needed to respect that moment. But I saw them down there. And that message is that they are not going to give up. And I understood that because I know we're not going to give up. And the only people who don't understand that are people that don't know our history and culture. But that tension is everywhere. It's in everything. You know, you ever be at a restaurant and some houses, people walk up, some African houses, people, and the Europeans are dining and having a great dining experience. And the African people come and ask for some money, and it gets very uncomfortable for these people. It gets very uncomfortable for a lot of people. It gets very uncomfortable for a lot of us. And that's this tension we're talking about that exists in this society. These, you know, Kwame Nkrumah called it a plenum of forces in tension, a plenum of forces in tension. In other words, what he's saying is that this society, this world, it exists with all these contradictions that are happening. The primary contradiction is the haves versus the have-nots, right? And as a result of that contradiction, it produces so many other contradictions, and they're all over the place, and we exist every day with them. We don't necessarily know it on a conscious level, but we exist every day with them. And the reason why I'm saying this is the role of people who say you want to have a better world is to exacerbate those contradictions. What's happening now is that people try to ignore them, pretend they don't exist. That's not what we want to do. We want to exacerbate them. We want to build it up so that people understand where the tension comes from. And we want to agitate and encourage us to organize so that we can alleviate the tension. That's what all this is about. So, it's also notable that, Ronald Reagan, who was president from 1980, 1988, right? And before that, he was governor here in California. He started his presidential campaign, apologize for the misspelled word presidential, but he started his presidential campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1980. There's only one thing that town is known for. You don't know, if I say Philadelphia, Mississippi, if you've heard of it at all, it's not because, they make the best ice cream. I don't know if they make ice cream or not. I'm just using an example. It's not because they make the best sports cars. It's not because of anything like that. The only reason why people that know about Philadelphia, Mississippi know about it is because those activists were murdered in cold blood there and nothing was done about it. And so this man having his presidential campaign kick off there, that's a clear statement that he's saying, I'm down with this. And those of you who don't like this, I'm not down with you. And so that's what he did. I mean, that's who he was, and I respect that. I wish they would do that now. Like I said it all the time. I wish that when Trump was president, I wish the one that's president now, because he's no different. He just a stumbling idiot version of Trump, who's also a stumbling idiot. But I wish that they would show up at the press briefing one of these days with a Klan robe on. That would be the happiest day of my life. If that happened. If they show up and just say we're issuing a decree to reinstitute slavery. We want these whatever they would call us enslaved. The proclamation is effective at midnight on January 1st. I would say, wow, it's about time that we got to the real nature of the problem instead of all these games. Because the reason why we're so confused is that they are so good at manipulation. When things were heated after y'all forget, but things in this country were so heated. People were so pissed after the Bush administration. That's why you got Obama. He was the cooler. That's what we call him, the cooler. He was the one that cooled off tensions. That's what he does. Nobody does that better than him. He's an expert at cooling off tensions. That's why when he was in office, you didn't protest nothing. You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything because his job is to make you believe you didn't have to do anything, that he would take care of it, or whatever he represents would take care of it. So that's the point, on that we just wanted to make, that this society is all about that tension. And it's not just racial tension, it's class tension, it's exploitation, it's the exploiter against the exploited. And that tension is going to continue to exist and exacerbate until the problem is solved. So, these two Fruitland Park, Florida police were fired in 2014 because it was found out that they were leaders in the local Ku Klux Klan there. And both of them, as you can imagine, had storied histories of violence against African and indigenous people, storied histories of complaints of violence, and nothing was done to them. And I guarantee you, I have not done this, but I'll bet you some money right now, if we looked at every police department in this backward society and even expanded it to Canada, to all throughout Africa, we would see the same thing. A lot of these police forces have former Nazis in it. I'm talking about from the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, and those people are at the point now where most of them have died off, but they've provided training to these people. Zionist training, Zionist Israel trains these people. I mean, these are fascists who are training police today in 2022 and beyond. These are fascists doing that. And so there isn't really a logical argument that police and white supremacist groups are somehow separate entities. There isn't really a logical argument to that. I mean, it's clear that we're talking about the same thing. And these racist history of police withstanding, today police forces in every branch of the U.S. military have white supremacists all throughout them. All throughout them, they exist. And so what that means is that they use, a lot of these people who carry out a lot of these violent acts. The most recent ones that they publicize are young people, like the mass shootings, but a lot of them, oftentimes they have military background and training. Like I was reading last night about, because I remembered it, but I didn't remember the details. So I just started researching it again. This guy, Patrick Purdy, P-U-R-D-Y, you should look it up. He was a former Marine who took an AK-47 and shot up a schoolyard of Asian children, predominantly Asian school in Stockton, California. Here in Stockton, Stockton's like 30 minutes from where I am. And he did that. And he did that because he killed himself in the course of it, but he had written the reasons why he did it. He talked about how so many people went to Vietnam and fought and were killed. 55,000 US troops were killed in Vietnam. And he went to do what he did as an act of revenge for them. But this was a Marine, so while people out here talking about we need to support, we thank you for your service, what we're saying is that these people are active terrorists out here who are trained. They're trained terrorists out here. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed. So how do we move past police? How do we move past the police? I think, I'm sorry, I missed one. Going back, apologies. I don't have Shakura here, so I got to do it all myself. So bear with me. But one of the things that this talks about is that even a police officer of any nationality who has nothing except the sincere intentions is faced with the institution that prohibits them from standing up for truth. You all have heard about the blue wall of silence. What is that? What that is that police have a code where you don't snitch on police. That's why it's humorous. If you understand policing in these backward societies, it's humorous when the police are talking about, well, we can't solve these murders in the inner city because people won't cooperate with us. And we should stop all this talk about no snitching. Well, nobody has a better no snitch culture than police agencies. Nobody can say anything about what police do. Like people always want, this is something you can tell people when they tell you, well, my brother, my sister, my cousin, whoever is a police officer, so they're not all bad. The best way to respond to that is say, well, where are these people? Where are these police departments with all these people that are your relatives and other people's relatives that are coming forward and talking about all this white supremacist violence these people are carrying out against our peoples, our communities? Where does it exist? Where are these African police that are coming out saying this? They don't exist. And the reason why they don't exist is because they couldn't work in that industry if they exposed their colleagues. And there are a number of examples of where these racist white police have made it clear to these Africans that, they'll set you up for murder on those jobs if you snitch on them. That's so obvious, y'all, that they even make movies about that, right? It's popular culture. The movie Copland, Sylvester Stallone, Robert De Niro, Malik Yoba, right? Harvey Keitel. Y'all seen that movie? Ray Liotta, who, he just passed away recently. That's what that whole movie is about, is what I'm talking about right now, that if you snitch on the police, they will make sure you are taken care of, and not in a good way. As Christina Aguilera says on the Waze directional application, not in a good way. She sings it. I can't sing like her, but that's what they're doing. So there isn't an argument about these people being the enemies of humanity. So how do we move past police? Because some people who are confused, they say, well, we don't have police. What will we do? And then right when they say that, they're not involved in any organizing work, because anyone that is answered this question timefold many years ago. So police alone kill on average 1,100 people per year. And about half of those people are African people, and a lot of them are indigenous people. And typically our experience with police are overwhelmingly oppressive. I mean, that's just the nature of it. Not going to get into the story because it's irrelevant. But I spent this morning in the back of a police car. Okay, it doesn't matter why I was there. I'm not there anymore. Your imagination can take that wherever you need for your imagination to take it. But I'm just saying, I spent some time in the back of a police car this morning. I've been there many times, and I'll probably be there many times again. But my point is that typically we don't understand how that we can have our own agency to engage police, or I'm sorry, to engage the problems in our communities without police. That's what I was trying to say. The argument of individualizing police is absurd, as I mentioned. Well, my brother, my sister, my cousin, etc. But we can come up with concrete processes to protect our communities and do away with this desire or feeling of fear that we have, that we think the only thing we could do when there's a problem is call 911. And there are many people's answers to all of these things to create safety that don't involve these institutions of oppression. And we just have to understand how to facilitate that. And then the first question is, do you believe that we can create that? Because history is full of examples of where that's happened. There are numerous broadcasts we've done on the nuts and bolts of how to build community defense projects, for example. And you can go on YouTube and look them up under Battling Revolutionary Community Defense. So you could do that. You can look at that and see what those are. Like, we don't have time to go into all of them today. I wrote a whole book about it, which I'll tell you about again at the end, as I always do. But these are methodologies designed to help us organize our communities in a way so that we don't need police. We can do that. I don't know about you, but I believe that we can do that, and we should do it. It's a healthier way for our community to exist. And it's one of, for those of you that say, well, I agree with Pan-Africanism, I agree with revolution, but until we get there, blah, blah, blah. Well, this is until we get there. We can still develop organizing mechanisms that allow us to have capacity to defend ourselves. And those types of institutions will grow to become revolutionary institutions to support our Pan-Africanist revolutionary work as we proceed with that. So this is how we need to start thinking about this stuff and building up our community's consciousness based on political education model and on the ground organizing, so that our people begin to believe they can solve their own problems. Now, I'll just say, there's this guy, Umar Johnson, who's a pseudo Pan-Africanist. If your understanding of Pan-Africanism comes from him, guess what? You don't know anything about Pan-Africanism. But he's on YouTube, and that's what people do. They got the PhDs from YouTube, so they're watching him, and they think they are learning something. But he's had this scam going for a number of years about he's starting a school, and he's collected hundreds of thousands of dollars from our people. Our people are so desperately oppressed. We'll give everything we have for any solution, even to people who are clearly not vetted to have integrity with how they carry out this mission. And so this guy collected all this money, and there's all kind of allegations about what he did with the money. I don't know, I don't care. But my point is that if you understand how to organize, anytime somebody has that approach, like send me this money and I'll build something, I know that's a scam right there, because I've organized multiple schools on multiple continents, and we never solicited a dime. If you have integrity in your work, the people will cash their welfare checks and give you a portion of that to do the work, because they're the ones who have the foot of the master in their neck. So they understand the oppression better than we do. And they know that the only way it's going to stop is when they can develop some capacity to make it stop. So when we come with a plan to do that, it has never been, in my experience, a problem getting people to support that kind of work. And we live in these societies that have all these financial resources. So it's not a problem of money. Anybody that says the reason why we can't build positive institutions because we don't have money doesn't understand revolutionary organizing at all. Doesn't understand it at all. Like I said, I wrote a whole book about how to organize, get all the money you need to do the work you need to do, and not have an issue. We have never had an issue with that. People will give money when they know that money was going to come back to them in the investment of quality work to advance our people towards liberation. Anybody sitting up on YouTube saying, I need 500,000 more dollars, they're just telling you they want to pimp you to send, for you to send your hard-earned money so that they could use it to do whatever he's doing with the money. And that's what happened. Not just him. It's, we going back to Father Divine, Daddy Grace, and all the charlatans we've ever had. I mean, that's always been how our people have been exploited. But imagine no police, and under this reality, police are no longer empowered, because there's only one thing that keeps the police empowered. And that thing is that we continue to rely on them. We continue to believe that we need them. We continue to permit them to enter into our lives and have an impact on our lives. Once if you imagine what I'm saying, if we had a community of 500 people, it was just 500 Africans in this community, right? And every problem they had organized a system and a process in that community to address those problems, a collective one. Because again, remember we said there's no individual solutions. We keep trying to solve these problems individually. How's that working for us? It's not. So a collective process of addressing problems. And if we have that, then when the police come in there, we can stop them and say, you're not wanted here. We don't want you here. We don't need you. And then that raises the revolutionary consciousness of the people engaged in that work, because they see that we can empower ourselves by developing our own agency and standing on our own dignity and doing work that's designed to benefit us, that doesn't have a profit motive. And that type of work prepares the people for the revolutionary model we're talking about with revolutionary Pan-Africanism, or one unified socialist Africa. So if we can get people to that level, it'll be much easier to get them to the level of international consciousness that we want and need to forward our struggle to the depths that it needs to be forwarded to. But these are just examples of how we can do that. And it just requires people who want to do work. And if you're not African, you're like, well, I want to do something. What can I do? Well, if you're European, you got more work than we do, because white people have to be organized in this way I'm talking about. Because if they're not, they're going to be used against our work. That's been the history. They're used against our work. That's been the history in Canada. That's been the history in Europe. It's been the history in Azania, South Africa, and in Zimbabwe, in all of these places where there are large populations of Europeans, in Australia, in occupied Palestine, here in the United States of America. They get in our way. Either they get in our way by being foot soldiers for the capitalist system and brutalizing us, or they get in our way. Like I saw this African posted, they helped organize a Juneteenth event, and the Europeans came and European the event. And so the person was on Facebook, just lamenting about how they had all these white folks were on there apologizing. Nobody don't care about your damn apology. The person wrote it, so they kind of opened the door for it. I get that. But I'm saying nobody's trying to get no apology I don't want no apology. I don't want no money from you. I'm talking about the people that say reparations is a check. We don't want that. We don't want no apology from you. We want you to organize your communities. Organize white people. Go door to door to white people and talk to white people about this system is exploiting them. Why are they supporting it? Why are they supporting Trump? Why are they supporting Biden? Why are they supporting the Democratic or the Republican Party? Why are they supporting any of that nonsense? We need white people to do that work, and white people don't want to do that work. They want to come and tell us what we need to be doing, or they want to have some far out fantasy about what they think should happen that doesn't have any accountability for them to do what actually needs to happen. This is why we're in the situation we're in. So there's enough work here with this community defense model for everybody to do it. And we need everybody engaged in doing it, you all. We desperately need everybody engaged in doing it. So we just want to close by saying that we appreciate you bearing with me. I know you would rather hear Shakura. I would rather hear Shakura, but we still kept it going on, and she will certainly be back next week. And we have some some of the programs coming up that are going to largely feature her because they're dealing with public health issues that she is very passionate about. So you want to look forward to that. But just to wrap this session up today, again, our point is that police as an institution were integral in sabotaging the effort for us to have a Juneteenth originally in the history that I laid out for you. So the fact that today the police are largely a part of these corporate sponsored Juneteenths is really the most clear reflection that anyone could provide as to why we need to reclaim Juneteenth and make it an African institution and take it back from Wells Fargo and Ben and Jerry's and Walmart and Apple and all these crooks and criminals that are running it. So this is the point, is that a true Juneteenth has organizations there signing up people to get involved in the struggle. It doesn't have Wells Fargo Bank and Brooks Brothers suits and police and U.S. military recruiting. That's not Juneteenth. That's a capitalist African removal program event. That's what that is. So we call it what it is. I mean, so we have to, really get to the point where we can identify that and do the propaganda work to get our people to identify that. That's what's necessary, because right now we are allowing them to take our history and our culture and shape it the way they want it to do to serve their interests. And we don't even understand anything about what it's about in the first place. Juneteenth is about freedom. There's nothing wrong with Juneteenth in its manifestation form. The problem with Juneteenth is the co-optation of people who in the capitalist system who are using that as the latest example of how they can confuse us about who we are in the society. So that's the point that we wanted to try to make today. And we hope that we did make it. And we certainly want to invite you back next week for sure. Sunday, June 26th, 4 to 5 p.m. We're going to talk about exposing efforts to slander the relationship between Fidel Castro and Ernesto Che Guevara. And you don't want to miss that one. It's going to be dynamic. What it's about is these are two revolutionaries known primarily from the Cuban Revolution. And what imperialism does is, if it cannot discredit genuine revolutionaries, then it takes somebody who's living, and Fidel Castro was living up until 6 years ago, right? They take someone who is living and they make an effort to use that person to sabotage the revolutionary who's not living that they want to discredit. So their example of that in this case is they have elevated this question of Fidel Castro setting up Che Guevara for murder in Che Guevara's last mission in Bolivia in 1967. So you want to join us next week and get this history. We're going to talk about how that lie is not true. It was instigated by the CIA. It was not true at all. And we know the history because we've researched it. So join us there. Don't let them soil the image of our revolutionaries. And a lot of people so-called left and right are confused about that issue. They're confused about the Cuban Revolution. They're confused about Fidel and Che. Somebody told me, well, Fidel was a dictator. And I said, why? And they got mad at me for asking. I'm like, well, you're mad because you're making an accusation you can't support. We're prepared to talk about that. So join us next week so you can get this information. And then you want to, continue to go to our APRP forward shop. Very important. Buy something. Even if you bought before, buy some more, gift it. This is how we support our revolutionary work. And APRP-INTL.org is essential. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. A lot of you are doing that, and we appreciate the opportunity to see many more do the same. And betterworld.me is my personal site where you can watch all these videos are housed there. They're housed on the APRP site as well. They're housed in a number of places, but you can go there. There's articles there. There's a lot of information. So check that out. And Hood Communist is out. We have a focus on Juneteenth. I wrote an article that was featured Thursday, so you can go to www.hoodcommunist.org and check it out. And I talked about it's time for us to reclaim Juneteenth. And I saw that the Ujima People's Party is having a discussion event tomorrow night based on the article I wrote. So that's very exciting. We need to have dialogue around this question of what we're talking about with Juneteenth, and not allow our enemies to co-opt our history and our culture. Okay. And we have all the programs on the bottom there. Check them out. They're very good. All of them are wonderful programs. They're as good, if not better than this one. So check them out and support them. There's a ton of information we're trying to get out here. We're trying to raise the consciousness. So help us do that, please. Help us do that. And then finally, I'll just say again, my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal and Fascist Violence. It's a 76-page manifesto, if you don't know. And the whole purpose of that book is to talk about the ways that we can organize in communities in this backward country so that we don't need police. The things that we talked about in this presentation. So would love to work with more people, working with a lot of people, going next week to do some workshops around the book, and encourage you to get it. Even if you got it, get some more, give them out to people. Let's raise this question of organization. You know, don't worry about, well, he's just trying to get book royalties. No, well, yeah, he is trying to get book royalties because the place I'm going next week, it'll pay for my gas. And that's why I do it. So nada. You know, we're trying to build. So we appreciate everybody. We thank you for bearing with me today. We hope that you'll come back next week and tell people. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Sunday afternoon. And Shakur and I will be back next week to talk about this sabotage against Fidel around his wonderful relationship with Ernesto Che Guevara. So join us for that and have a great rest of your evening. Pan-Africanism is inevitable, you all. It is going to happen. So have a good rest of your Sunday. Take care. We'll see you next week. Forward ever, backwards never.